Wow. So that's what our staff, our colleagues at AMI decided to do for International Women's Day. We decided to pledge, and our pledges were around how we can make tangible differences in the way we see women, how we advocate for their rights. So I want to challenge you tonight. This is what we choose to challenge you, Naomi and I, and the AMI family. We choose to challenge you to advocate for women in your world, and we choose to challenge you to celebrate their achievements every single day. Hello and welcome. My name is Irene Okoye, and I'm so happy to welcome you to another episode of Africa Thrive Live. And as always, I'm not alone. I'm with my co-host.
Hey, Irene. Hey, Irene. Welcome to everyone. Welcome everyone. My name is Naomi. I am based here in Kenya, and welcome to all those tuning in on LinkedIn. I see you guys, YouTube and Facebook. If you're new to Africa Thrive Live, just put on the comments, say first time, raise your hand. And if you are a usual veteran, go ahead and just tell us where you're tuned in from today. Would love to give you a shout out. And even if you're new, go ahead, join the guys. Tell us what's your business, what do you do, and would love to just get to feature and read some of those. So do tell us that. And if it's your very first time and you're wondering who's AMI, what's Africa Thrive Live, Irene will shortly tell you about us. Irene?
Awesome, Naomi. So AMI stands for the African Management Institute. I've had us being called very interesting names, AMI sometimes, but it basically stands for the same thing, African Management Institute. We're passionate about working with entrepreneurs and enabling them to succeed in their businesses. And we do this through training and offering and providing tangible and practical skills that they can apply in their business setup. So these conversations are held every single month. And the aim of Africa Thrive Live is basically to walk with you through your entrepreneurial journey by listening to stories of entrepreneurs that are walking through those steps or have somewhat taken 2 or 3 strides ahead of us. So they're basically about you, the entrepreneur, and centering you above everything else. So this show is about you. As Naomi said, please engage with us, ask us questions, engage with the wonderful panel that we have. And another thing that I wanted to introduce you to in case you haven't had an opportunity, and I believe it's so important, especially now in the context of the pandemic, recovery phase, and you're wondering, okay, am I alone in this, in the position that I am at as a business? We have a wonderful group of ambitious people, and we call them Thrivers. So if you want to find out what the Thrive community is about, it's basically business leaders from the African continent, businesses, entrepreneurs, large, small. We all come together monthly through different events, and we get to engage with each other. There's no beauty like actually learning from each other from across the continent. Just imagine the peer-to-peer coaching that happens, the learning that happens. And just to give you a snippet of what you can expect by joining the Thrive community, take a listen, take a watch of this.
Yeah, so in case you're not part of Thrive, do join us. The links are on the comments. And let me just give, if you've come to our Thrive networking events, you know how some usually has this ululation session, yeah? So I just want to ululate for some people who it's their very first time. But because now I'm alone and you guys are not, you can't relate with me, I'll just not embarrass myself. Welcome, Kazim. This is your very first time to Africa Tribe Live from Nigeria. You're welcome. Oma, I see you. Welcome back. Situma Wafula, who's a regular. He runs a hospital. Welcome, Situma. It's nice to see you again. I see we have Jawi from Zimbabwe, and he's also a newcomer. Welcome. And let's see who else we have here. We have Albert, who's joining us from Nigeria. So go ahead in the comment section, just tell us where are you tuned in from, what does your business do, and would love to have you part of this conversation, yeah? So let's get started. I'm really excited about this topic, Irene, because, you know, for those who know, we have business growth programs for SMEs. And when we survey our SMEs and they're applying to join the program, over 40% of them say, I want to join because I want to grow. And growth is something I think we yearn for as human beings. It's something that really drives us, whether it's personally or whether it's just on a business level. So I'm really excited about this conversation today about growth, yeah? And so we like having very honest conversations in this session, Irene. And, you know, growth is attractive. We all want to grow. We all want to make more money. But growth is also hard. And one of the reasons I think growth is hard is because there's no single formula that, you know, this is how you grow. So there are so many ways of businesses to grow, and people take different paths. For some businesses, it could be growth could be taking that huge leap of faith and getting external financing from a bank or from an investor, and that helps you do a lot in such a short time. For some, it could be just growing slowly but surely and saving every little thing that you're reinvesting. So growth in business it looks different for different people. So what has worked for you? Please tell us in the comment. What has worked for you? What do you believe is the key to business growth, or how are you trying to grow? Which path are you taking? Would love to hear from you. But to have this conversation, I'm really excited to bring in two gentlemen, and they'll share about their journey in business and also their journey through growth. So help me welcome. We'll have Tinashe Ruzane. So Tinashe is the co-founder of Flex Club. And just a few weeks ago, he managed to raise $5 million in investment for his business. So he'll tell us about that. Yay. And we are also joined by Ivan Mbowa. Ivan is an entrepreneur who's dedicated his entire career to access to finance for SMEs in Africa. And currently he is the managing director of Tala. Tala is a Kenyan firm, and Tinashe Flex Club is based in South Africa and Mexico. And they'll tell us about their businesses. So back to the ululations, which I'm actually not doing. Go to the emojis on your screen. You know how we do this, guys. Help me welcome to the screen Tinashe and Ivan. So put those like buttons, love, hand claps, all of them. Welcome, guys. Welcome, Tinashe. Welcome, Ivan.
Thank you, Naomi.
Yeah. So please good, Ivan. Please introduce yourself. Tell us what your business is involved in. And Tinashe, let's start with you. First of all, congratulations on securing $5 million. You will tell us how you did it, but just introduce yourself. Other than the guy who raised $5 million, who are you? And what's
No, thanks. That's a high pressure sort of intro there, but yeah, thanks a lot for the opportunity. So just to introduce Flex Club a little bit. So Flex Club is a marketplace that connects people looking for long-term flexible access to a car with our partners that are offering what we call car subscriptions. So someone can subscribe for a car on a monthly basis. That's all inclusive of insurance and maintenance. And in the event that they want to change the car, or they want to pause the subscription, or even buy the car, they can do that at their own leisure. And we've been doing this now for 2 years, and excited about our growth opportunity in both South Africa and Mexico, which are currently our two primary markets. But yeah, happy to engage and share more about our story if helpful for the entrepreneurs on the call.
Yeah, welcome, Tinashe. And to you, Ivan, the guy who's dedicated. When I read that, I was like, wow, I don't know if I can say I've dedicated something to my career. When I saw you've dedicated your entire career to raising finance or access to finance for SMEs. Who's Ivan? And then you tell us about your motivation, what drives you to be passionate about what you do. Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you very much, Naomi and Irene, for this very warm introduction. So my name's Ivan Mbowa. Today, I am the managing director at Tala. Tala is a mobile and data science company that was one of the first fintechs in this market to provide unsecured credit to Android device holders who download our app about 7 years ago in this market. Since then, we've expanded to have about 1 out of 4 adults in Kenya have downloaded our app. We've dispersed over 3 million loans, worth close to $2 billion. So a pretty large firm. Before coming into this role, I was actually an entrepreneur. And I spent a little under 6 years building my own fintech startup that was focused on providing access to capital to small businesses in the agricultural value chain. And before that, I was a banker for 8 years. So I've sort of worn many different hats through the years. But the same common theme has always been about trying to drive access to finance in Africa for small businesses, for individuals. And in terms of why I dedicated it, I think I might have just stumbled into finance. I fell in love with it. It's never left. And that's how I sort of accidentally became this person who continues to dedicate now, I think it's about 16 years of my career in finance as an entrepreneur, an executive, and once upon a time a banker.
Wow, super impressive listening to both of you. And I guess one question that we always get from entrepreneurs is, where did it all start? So Ivan, you've spoken about being a banker and then making the transition. A lot of people think about it and get heart palpitations, basically. So if you could just walk us through, I understand that your passion was always in finance, but how was the transition for you? And Tinashe, I'll pose the same question, but we'll start with Ivan.
Sure. So one of the things is you might notice is that I spent 8 years of my career working in the same industry that I'd eventually try and start a company in. And so I think one thing that was really helpful was that I had exposure. I was able to sort of understand how one side of the market was trying to solve the problems that I could see, but it also meant I could actually see the gaps, right? So I think you should never underestimate how important it is that if you're actually working in an industry and you see a gap or an opportunity, you might actually be very well placed to actually go ahead and leave that job. But I will give some disclaimers later on, to actually go ahead and start that enterprise. And I think in my case, I was also really fortunate that I met the perfect co-founder. My co-founder had been a serial entrepreneur, which meant that he and I were able to avoid a lot of common mistakes together. It was my first time as an entrepreneur. He had been a serial entrepreneur. And both of us really got obsessed with this perfect idea around how we could use a technology platform to sort of bridge access to capital for small businesses. So we spent about 8 months brainstorming, talking to investors, talking to potential customers, just really poking holes in this plan that we thought we had. And then came the time when you had to really take the leap, right? Or I like to call it building the plane as you've jumped off the cliff. And I can say we were relatively successful early on, which was great. But also we encountered a lot of challenges later on. But that's the sort of quick snapshot is how I found myself as an entrepreneur. It was spending 8 years working in the industry, understanding it, seeing the gaps, seeing what other competitors were doing, meeting what I thought was a perfect co-founder who had a good balance of experiences that complemented my own, getting obsessed with an idea, and then actually just doing it, right? Because there comes a time when you have to stop talking and you actually just have to start doing this.
I like that. I like the fact that you said there has to be a time where you stop talking and actually do it. Take the leap, because a lot of people keep postponing that and you keep saying, I'll do it next year, I'll take the leap next year. And for you, Tinashe, working at Uber and then making the transition to starting FlexCab, like where did that whole idea start from? What was the journey for you into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, sure. So I think I've been obsessed about mobility for a long time. Early on in my entrepreneurial career, if you will, I attempted to import scooters into the South African market and increase access to scooters for students before then moving into management consulting. Also working with different clients in that environment, so car manufacturers, and then eventually also spending some time in impact investing, so getting to see a very different side of things, but also seeing sort of the micro entrepreneurship sort of informal market in South Africa, and then finally making the leap into Uber, where I grew to become the head of vehicle solutions for Uber across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And in that role, I mean, I was responsible for building a team that was building partnerships with banks, leasing companies, car rental companies, car manufacturers, distributors to increase access to cars. And maybe to some extent, became acutely aware of a very large problem. So to Ivan's point, I think I felt that I was well placed to solve that problem and jump over and start building a solution. Ultimately, at the core of it, a company is just a group of people coming together to solve a problem for a group of customers. And I felt like the people around me were the right people to solve the problem, and we were ready to jump in and get started. And yes, super happy about what we've achieved in the last 2 years, but there's still so much more for us to do to solve the problem for our customers.
Cool. And just to give a shout out to those who are joining us now, Veronica, Mathenge from Nairobi, welcome. And all those, I see so many people. Yakini, welcome back. Please post your comments as you always do. Post your questions and we'll get them answered. We have this really experienced entrepreneurs for an hour, so we want to make the most out of it. Yeah. So send in those questions. Tinashe, let's start with you. Tell us about your growth. Maybe paint us a picture from when you were starting or when you were selling scooters and having this entrepreneurial spirit within you to now when you've built a business that's raised funding. Yeah. Take us through, how did you actually grow? Is there a formula?
I mean, I wouldn't say there was a formula I was following, but I think what I appreciated was there were gaps in my knowledge, and there still are gaps in my knowledge, and there will always be. And I think one of the things you must accept is that you're an eternal student as an entrepreneur, and you have to constantly be learning and figuring out how to close those gaps. And I think if I think about the version of myself 10 years ago, that version knows far less than what I know now. So there are things that I think I would have avoided had I known some of these things and avoided some rookie mistakes. And my personal growth is what's enabled me to kind of drive growth in the way we build the business. And I think that's important, is to continue to invest in yourself as an entrepreneur, invest in your development. And the only way you do that is by consuming content, consuming material, consuming just knowledge, whether that knowledge is from materials you're reading or for connecting with experts in the space. I think that's something I really thoroughly enjoy. So I like surrounding myself with people that are just far smarter than me and can teach me a thing or two about areas of business that I frankly just don't know as much about as them.
And so give us a sneak peek to what you've said about there are things I would have avoided. And I'd go there. Like what's one thing you would have avoided?
Yeah, I mean, if I think about a basic mistake that I made in the scooter business, so it's a funny story, but I imported my first scooter from China into Durban, which is the port where most of our products will ship. And from there, I didn't actually have a clear strategy or plan as to how I'd get the scooter into the city in which I was operating, which was Pretoria. But once I did, I immediately just jumped into trying to get the scooter in front of other students, organizing test drives, etc. But I hadn't thought seriously about the risks, the liabilities that come with doing test drives. So I didn't have any indemnity forms for one, but also didn't have the appropriate insurance cover to sufficiently protect the asset that I had just spent months waiting for. But I think that I was 19 when I did that. So I think there were, definitely things that I think I expected that I knew so much because I'd read so much, but sometimes there's just no replacement for just being in the market, being in the ring and getting punched in the face. That's the best way to teach you, about business. And I think that was a great punch that I carry that lesson with me to this day. I'm very thorough in understanding what are the risks of every move I make, I'm not saying I'm overly conservative. Obviously, every entrepreneur has to have a certain dose of a high enough risk appetite to make moves. But yeah, I'm calculated, and I think that's played a role in helping us survive up until this point. Thinking about our new business, which is Flex Club, and I think will continue to be a part of how I approach business moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Ivan, let's go to you. What are some of the punches you have taken as an entrepreneur, and how have you grown?
Wow. I can start with the punches, rather dramatic. So maybe to sort of talk about growth. And as Tinashe said, it's important to get punched in the face. I remember that when we first had this idea, we went to speak to a very experienced entrepreneur who had raised tens of millions of dollars, had grown a Pan-African business. And we're giving him the theory and walking him through these fancy, PowerPoint presentation decks. They said, let me stop you right there. He said, have you tasted first blood? And we were like, no, what does that mean? And he basically said, have you actually convinced someone to exchange money for the so-called value that you think you can create? And that was a really critical lesson, right? The sense of like, there's no amount of design in the workshop that will help you create the perfect product without getting out there and actually seeing, okay, so you have this idea, can I actually convince someone to pay me value? So in terms of growth, and I'll give you a little bit of background, we were creating a financing platform, right? Which means that we have to have investors, people with money on one hand, and people who need that money, right? Small businesses. And so when it comes to sort of tasting first blood, it's really tricky. It's a two-sided platform. I'm sure as Tinashe will know, you have to figure out which side to sort of bounce out first. And we were very ambitious. And actually, I look back now, I think the first thing I did, and one of the first punches in the face I took was this over and optimism that a lot of entrepreneurs have around just how quickly you will make the whole model work, right? So I remember leaving my job as a banker, and I made several mistakes. One, I thought I had enough money to cover my own personal expenses for 12 months, but I forgot that this same money that I had for myself would also have to cover business expenses until I convinced someone else to put money in. So first thing first was kind of this assuming that things would pick up really quickly. And so, you have this little pot of cash. In less than 3 months, my 12-month runway disappeared. It was gone, right? So lesson one is that plan for the worst case, right? Your first plan is always way too optimistic, right? Second thing is we then had to figure out, well, okay, we're a financing platform. We talked to lots of investors who theoretically said, yeah, I love this idea. I'll put money inside your platform. But many people don't want to take the first risk. And so the second lesson is you discover sometimes you have to put a lot of your own skin in the game, which meant we found ourselves literally, I found myself going to my bank and taking a loan from my bank because they thought I was still employed. So taking a salaried loan and using that money to lend to customers while I was still trying to figure out how to select the right customers. So, I mean, this is some real risky stuff. I can't tell you, like, the first few months of trying to figure out, can I find high quality borrowers who want my product at my price and will repay me? And can I find enough of them that convince someone else to give me their money so I can take out my money and use it to actually grow the team? So the first couple months and up to a year, and I think for many entrepreneurs who are building somewhat slightly complex businesses, you'll find that almost never do you have everything aligned, and you shouldn't be worried. That is part of the journey. And in fact, that kind of stuff really separates the wheat from the chaff, meaning you'll really know whether entrepreneurship is for you or not based on your ability to stomach that level of uncertainty, right? I remember in the early years, sometimes you think it's all coming together, and sometimes you think, yeah, it's absolutely nothing, because you're seeing every piece is just not aligning. But how we eventually got growth was, it was a good thing we used our own money to take that first risk. We were lucky we found some good borrowers, and we were then eventually able to actually convince other people, initially the family, friends, former clients network, to sort of put in capital, find more clients to take that capital. And within about a year of launching, finally getting a good, decent sized check from external investors, I think our first fundraisers was about $400,000 after a year, and then eventually would end up raising about almost $3 million so in equity over the next 2.5 years. But I can tell you, a lot of people just sort of focus on the headlines, right? They sort of see this big number of, well, you raised X million, but they have no idea how many mistakes you have to make, how much uncertainty you have to stomach to finally have something that looks like a clear picture emerge that can convince others, oh, you have a business. Let me actually fund it. Let me join your team. Let me, give you this first deal. So I don't know if I answered your question, but let's just say in the early days, growth is not even a straight line. It is, almost like concentric circles and squiggles and up and down, and it's all over the place.
I really like that, Ivan. Growth is not, and actually, it's not a straight line, and I like that because it just double taps on Naomi's point when she was talking about there's no actual formula to growth. And I suppose that leads me to my question for both of you, especially Ivan, just thinking about putting your fintech hat on and thinking about businesses that you've worked with. So we're talking about growing organically versus getting external funding. And I'm just wondering, is it a type of sector? What really should entrepreneurs be looking out for before they go out there? Because most people will start a business and they immediately go out there looking for funding. At what point should a business, is it a maturity thing? At what point should entrepreneurs start seeking external funding? And at what point do you believe they need to be focusing on their own, reinvesting whatever they have?
Yeah, great question. I think I'll be a little controversial. I'd say there are very few businesses that should even remotely think that they should get someone else's money first on day one before they've actually built any value. Unless you are a scientist who has come up with some amazing intellectual property, right? Something that, from day one, you have an asset. You have something that no one else knows in this market, and people can validate that you have it. Then yes, you can probably get people to open their checkbooks. Secondly, unless you are born very lucky, very wealthy, and have these great networks, again, that's probably where you can essentially get and raise capital from day one. But for almost everyone else, I would actually say that you have to sort of spend time validating this idea you have in your head. And the word validation sounds pretty simple, but it can be nerve-wracking, right? It really means testing and ensuring, is the thing that I set out to solve actually real? Do I have some sort of competitive advantage to do so? And can I actually have a proof of concept, right? Can I take it from my head to a PowerPoint deck to an actual tangible thing? And so if you're starting a business and you think, well, how do I actually get started? For most people, you are going to have to bootstrap, right? And so one of the things I think about, one of the mistakes that I made, well, not a mistake, one of the things I would do differently is maybe I would not have quit my job so quickly when I was still in the validation stage. I was a purist. I still am, unfortunately. I still like to think I only like to do one thing and do it really well. But I think for the vast majority, if you do have the benefit of being employed and you can somehow use that to ensure you don't need to pay yourself, and essentially you have your employer funding your research and development, right? Your R&D as you think about putting this product together, that would be the best way to get started until you have something of value, something tangible, until you're like the scientist, with an asset that people can actually say, oh, this thing has value. And then if you can, go ahead and try and see whether you can actually, your cash flows can begin to cover your costs. And that takes a long time. So there really is no equation. Even when it comes to the funding formula, there's no one straight equation. What I can tell you is that it'll take longer than you think for many times for your business to get traction. So make sure you have a plan. And then even when it comes to raising capital, I can tell you some nightmare stories about mistakes I made raising capital, checks I wish I'd never taken. Even when you get there, it's like snakes and ladders. I can't describe it to you. They're really, progression is not always what it seems. So let me stop there and I'll stop being cryptic and explain it at a later time.
Yeah, wow, very insightful thoughts. Tinashe, I'm just going to bring you in here, and you've got this brilliant idea, and you need to get started. You already have your MVP. You're ready. What do you do? What was it for you in terms of the fundraising aspect in finance? At what point did you start reaching out to external?
Yes, I mean, for us, basically, once we had some early traction with customers, I think, to Ivan's point as well, it's far easier to tell a story about how you're building a larger business that has massive growth potential when you've proven that you have the ability to sell to customers and customers are willing to buy. So once we had the first few customers, in our case, we started off with ride-hailing drivers. So folks that were using the Uber platform to earn a living that couldn't typically access a car through traditional finance could now subscribe through our platform. And how we were getting cars for them to subscribe to was leveraging sort of peer-to-peer networks where people that owned cars could put cars on the marketplace and make them available to what we call our members, and we would manage everything in between. So once we had done a few reps around that, we then started to engage with VC investors pretty broadly, but actually a combination of both institutional funds and angel investors. But to Ivan's point, I think we quickly realized that not all money is good money. Not all money is the right money. So some folks are have different intentions and objectives with their checks, while others are truly backing your vision. And I think that those are the folks you're looking for. More than anything, I'd rather take $10,000 from someone that really believes in us than take $100,000 from someone that's trying to achieve a different objective as far as enabling our vision's concerned. And yeah, so basically it was literally build a Google sheet, hack your CRM, put the list of all the people you want to get in front of. There are different approaches to this. Some people say you put the ones that you don't want to dance with first to kind of get your own selling reps out the way, because ultimately when you kind of enter the fundraising process, it's a roadshow that requires a lot of storytelling, and you'll find that your story gets better along the way. So the first version of my story, I can tell you, in 2018, the first version of the story, it was definitely not as polished as what it is now. I think you also have to kind of learn how to speak the language of the investor. What are they actually looking to understand in the 30 minutes or the 45 minutes that you have with them, versus understanding maybe the operational details, which might have been our inclination. So I think that process has continued to evolve. Even now, it's still evolving. And now we're engaging with seed stage investors, but the profile of investor changes as we scale. Then engaging with a Series A investor, and so it continues. And I think for us, the key thing we try to keep consistent is demonstrating why we are the right team to build this solution, why our solution has the potential to scale beyond just the markets we're currently operating in, because that's what investors want to get behind. Most early stage investors, I'm not sure if everyone on the session is, or in the session is in technology, but most early stage technology investors are looking to buy growth. It's not necessarily about short-term profitability or you hitting sort of profitability in the next 3 to 5 years. Obviously that helps in telling a better story, but they're looking to buy growth, and they need to see that there's a clearer path to growth. But of course, everything is subjective. Again, to the earlier point, we're all naturally optimists. We're going to grow 10 times over the next year, and then it's going to be 20 times, and then it's going to be crazy. We won't know what to do with ourselves. And then you hit a plateau of 2 months of nothingness, and you can't figure out what the hell is happening. So yeah, you do need to kind of bake in a decent amount of conservatism in how you tell that story, because also you'd rather be the type of entrepreneur that under promises and over delivers, and that's how you then increase demand for any fundraising activity that you're looking to fundraising interest that you're looking to garner along the way.
Well, Ivan, let me just say that you are slowly becoming a Twitter celebrity. So your quote is now up. Entrepreneurship is your ability to stomach uncertainty. We'll put that, and we'll put a poster, and we'll say Ivan Mbowa, yeah? So, Tinashe, let me go back to you and echo something that Ivan said. He said how it's, and actually the reality is almost all entrepreneurs won't get access to financing, won't get access to funding, and won't be as lucky as you were. I don't know if it's luck, but it won't be in the same position that you're in. So assuming there was no funding, assuming you had to build, how would you grow your business? What practical things do you think you can share with other entrepreneurs about just growing organically?
Yeah, I actually think that everything is, centered around the customer. If you can build a community of customers that are fanatical about your product, everything else emanates from that. And you need to figure out how to do that consistently, whether or not you have the funding. I think that was always, the key for us. And to your point, I would call it luck. As the old quote goes, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. I just feel like we were so well prepared for this opportunity because of our experience. And to go back to the point around not just jumping in because you think the idea is fantastic and you don't want to lose out now. You don't want to tell anyone else about the idea because it might steal your idea. I think we recognize that we had to invest years in the asset financing space and automotive space to understand, and mobility to understand how all these things connect. So that's 4 years of my career at Uber. My co-founder also spent 5 years at Uber, and before that, in sort of funding entrepreneurs or looking to acquire assets, and then before that, obviously, there's the scooters, etc., and also working with car manufacturers. And that's a decade of experience I had to go in to ensure that we were prepared to meet the opportunity and obviously make it more compelling for funders. But in the absence of that, I would still just focus on creating a magical experience for our customers. We felt that traditional vehicle financing was archaic. It hadn't evolved in 100 years. Why is anyone trying really hard to change that, make it more accessible, make it flexible? Why is it the customer's problem to now figure out what's the optimal financing structure for a car? How should it be insured? How should it be maintained? And I think even if we didn't have funding, we'd start with just building that community of, I want one customer that really loves a subscription, and we deliver the car to their house and they're like, wow, I will never want to go to a dealership and buy a car that way ever again, because what Flex Club has given me is amazing, and they'll tell their friends. And so it continues. And then you find that you're either funding your business through revenue or through external funding. And I think the alternative would be just build a product that people want to pay you for. And that would obviously enable you to grow, but obviously just at a slower pace of what you might have had you had the external funding to boost you.
Ivan, you've worked with so many SMEs, whether it was at your business or even now at Tala, yeah? And maybe you give us the statistics. Is it 90-80% don't get funding? So what do you tell them? What practical things can they do to grow?
Yeah, it's probably closer to, maybe closer to 90% when you think about like those who don't get funding. So what would I do if I couldn't access external funding? It really depends, I think, on the nature of your business, right? So let me give you some sort of classic hacks of how people have sort of been able to bridge this gap. If you can't, and let's actually take a step back. Who would give you funding as an SME? The traditional thought is thinking, can I go to a bank? Can I go to a network of friends? Can I hopefully approach a venture capitalist? Is there someone giving free money? And we can sort of talk through almost all of these options. Unfortunately, in this region, especially in Kenya and East Africa as a whole, banks are not your first choice when it comes to funding. With the exception of, I'll say, really microfinancing, you're talking about maybe, I guess for those in Kenya, we're talking about 10,000 shillings, 15,000 shillings, or it's equivalent to about $100 to $150 type funding. Banks, yes, are now making that sort of funding available on sort of digital finance platforms. And you have players like Tala, the company with which I work with, who are also really are providing funding from $50 to $300. But let's just say you actually need it as a business and you need more than that. You typically find that unless you're fortunate enough to either have saved it, right, out of your own income, right, as I talked about earlier on, you have a network of family and friends, it can be quite challenging. So you kind of go to what Tinashe talked about, which is funding yourself through the business itself. And so some businesses actually, I think, have a fantastic opportunity, and I would like to call sort of leveraging a working capital gap, right? Which is ultimately, let's say you're in a business where you have to buy supplies from one party. you possibly add value to that, and then you sell it to another party. So the trick, of course, is to think about, to sort of get that growth going, can you convince the person who supplies you to take payment later than when you receive the goods? And can you convince the person you're going to sell to either pay you upfront or even ahead of time? And if you do, you sort of have what we call this float, right? You essentially have a situation where technically you can leverage someone else's cash, right? You're not yet paying your supplier. You've received money from your client. You have to be very careful here, because if you're not careful, you might end up going ahead and racking up debt with your supplier, not pay your supplier, and then you won't be able to necessarily invest those proceeds in doing even more sales, right? So that classic working capital gap can be a very interesting way of funding yourself. Other ways that I encourage entrepreneurs to think about is, can you pay suppliers in kind, or can you trade services, right? Can you essentially, like almost bartering, can you sort of move away from the need for cash? Is there something that you can offer, or your company can offer, that another company needs? And in so doing, you find a way of actually getting that value, which you can then go ahead to try and monetize. And ultimately, if you can't, then you have to do it customer by customer, right? You have to think, can I find my one customer, sell to that customer, and try and get sort of viral growth through organic channels? Can I get and convince my customer to refer me to another customer, and I'll give this customer referred me a discount? And slowly by slowly, you're essentially building up, building up your base of sales. So growth doesn't have to come from, let's call it the traditional, what we see, Silicon Valley $1 million check, right? They're few and far between, and in fact, quite complex. Growth can come from multiple avenues. You can do it from your business, you can hack working capital gaps. There are free sources of funding, and that really depends on the space that you're in. It could be that the problem that your business is trying to solve is also a problem that someone else wants to solve, and that someone else is actually not a business, but an ecosystem enabler, right? And all of a sudden you have this fantastic synergy. It's almost like this partnership where you're like, they're like, you're the brains and hands that will actually go ahead and do the work. We want to see that outcome. Why don't we give you money to enable you to do that? And of course, that can be a very sweet spot, because essentially you're growing with what I like to call free money, but money is never free because there are conditions attached to it. Just ask anyone who's got grant funding. But that's also another way of sort of funding your growth. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you guys are sharing such amazing nuggets. And I just want to bring in the audience. I've got a question from Yukini. Actually, if you could just pull that question. It's for Tinashe. And Yukini, watching on YouTube, is asking, what motivates you to keep moving in your line of business?
I guess the biggest thing, thanks Yukini for the question. I think the biggest thing for me personally is I feel like I'm genuinely trying to solve a problem that I care about. And until I feel like I've made a meaningful dent in that problem and our team has made a meaningful dent, our work is not complete. And so every morning I wake up just thinking, what could we do differently to accelerate our ability to solve this problem in a way that's differentiated from everyone else, where our customer, we actually build a very deep relationship with our customer. I really am, I know it's quite cliche in the technology world because everyone idolizes Jeff Bezos and Amazon and how Amazon drives customer obsession, but we are truly customer obsessed. We want to go above and beyond because that's how you build long-lasting relationships with your customer. If you have a long-lasting relationship with your customer, then that's how you can build a sustainable business. So yeah, the key thing that motivates me is how to keep taking the experience another level. Actually, there's a fun idea that it's actually from Brian Chesky, the founder of Airbnb. And he talks about building how Airbnb thought about building the 10-star experience. And so they work from 10 stars all the way down to 5. And you try to imagine Airbnb as a business, and you try to imagine what would a 10-star experience look like for Airbnb as a guest. If you arrive, say in Nairobi or Johannesburg or Cape Town, you got an Airbnb, land at the airport, what does 10-star look like? Well, 10-star is, there's a red carpet rolled out by the plane, and there's a band playing, and people are holding your sign, screaming your name. So obviously, not all of those things are realistic, and you have to scale down and figure out, okay, what are those kind of elements we can keep to make our customer just feel like, wow, this has nothing on, or like every other hotel experience has nothing on this experience that I've just had. If you think about the Airbnb context. So I think like that for me has always got, not just me, but the entire team, our brains are always ticking, and we come the next day, hey guys, what if we do this? What if we try this for the customer? And it's in the small things sometimes. It's when we deliver a car, add a bouquet of flowers, bottle of champagne, and so I think like that for me is fun, because I just enjoy kind of seeing the joy come back from the customer and feeling like, wow, we did a good job today. Let's just keep doing that.
Wow, that's splendid. So I'm thinking about also getting into this, because I do want a bottle of champagne and flowers when I work with you guys. I just want to pose the same question to you, Ivan, as well, if you're offering champagne as well. But no, I'm just kidding about that. But I just want to find out, I don't know if your business is also offering the thrills and thrills, but what motivates you?
What motivates me? So it's interesting, because I had a transition a couple of years ago where I transitioned from my startup, and I had to think about, it was time to do something else, something new, right? And I had to think about, well, I've had the ride of a lifetime for 5.5 years. In some ways, it's like that parable, the guy who's riding a tiger, and everyone's like, wow, you're riding the tiger. And he's like, how do I get off like getting eaten? So, I've had that experience, 5.5 years of just my stomach's in my mouth. And now the question is, well, what am I going to do that's going to excite me? Like, I don't want the roller coaster, but I want to feel alive, right? And so I came up with this really simple framework around how I think about, okay, what should I do next? Who should I join? And the first thing is thinking about, I want to do work that I consider to be meaningful, right? I remember telling a family member or a friend of mine that I thought that my startup was doing so important that it would still be worth doing even if I knew I was going to fail when I started, right? It would not have been a waste of time. It's so aligned to who I am that it is work that had to be done regardless of the outcome, right? So it's just like, what kind of work gives me that direction, that sense of rootedness? I wanted work where I'd have, I'd learn something new, right? I've spent 16 years in financial services, but they've all been somewhat different. I think within those 16 years, I've held 8 different jobs, right? I've done 8 different roles within financial services. I've not done like one thing. So I've sort of looked and gone around many different times. And so I love to, yes, I like to build on top of my knowledge of this sector, right? So I get financial services, but what part of financial services do I not yet know? What can I learn? And then the final piece is I want to actually have the ability to determine the work that I do. I want someone to say, okay, Ivan, we're going to hire you to solve this problem. Then I need you to get out of the way and allow me to figure out a way to solve it. So just give me clarity as to how you will measure my success, and then give me the autonomy to determine how I actually get that work done. And when I find that I have alignment of purpose, I am in an environment where I'm learning, I have my autonomy. And in fact, this thought actually came from a book that I read, a really great book called, I think it was Your Brain at Work, something of the sort. Yeah, really good book. I think by, I want to say Daniel, I think, but I'll remember what it is. That it really gave me a good idea of like, okay, this is how you engage, this is how my brain is engaged. And so to answer your question, how do I actually motivate myself is, if one of those 3 things is off, then I am off, and there's no equilibrium. I have to leave what I'm doing. When the purpose is gone, when the autonomy is gone, when the learning is gone, and they're all gone, then I'm completely gone, right? So that is how I sort of motivate myself on a day-to-day basis.
Cool. I like that, Ivan, and I think Oprah always says that there's nothing, there's no really a bad decision or a wrong path. It's just, and there's really nothing like mistakes. It's just a path. So makes a lot of sense. Tinashe, you said a question that you said something that resonates with a question we have here from our Oga. if you're in Nigeria, you know, if you're in East Africa, Oga Tom. He asked a question here. Let me just get it. So he's really obsessed about customers as well, thinking 10 stars. But his question is, what is it that you're learning now as an entrepreneur that you didn't know 6 months ago or 12 months ago?
Yeah, I think for me personally, I think I thought differently about what the purpose or what at least what my role is, in the team. And I think, and I'm starting to kind of evolve now, where I realize that ultimately I'm looking to facilitate the establishment of a team that can do this without me. So in some ways, I'm trying to make myself obsolete. And I think I wasn't thinking about that. I wasn't thinking about it that way 6 months ago, 12 months ago. Also, 6 months ago was a very scary time given the pandemic. So I feel like there's just a lot of trauma that we were navigating, and it was probably just more firefighting there. But I think the key thing now is I do have this strong awareness of what I need to do to enable this to become something that I can be proud of. But also, secondly, related to that is the idea that I should just focus on the things that I'm good at. So I think there's a very popular misconception that you need to keep plugging your weaknesses. I mean, I buy that to some extent, but I feel that there's just so much more power in increasing your strengths and investing in your strengths. And I think like the team that I work with now know that there's some things that I'm just not good at, and I've also had to learn. In the early days, you do everything because it's just you, or it's just you and 3 other people, or whatever the number might be. But as the team scales, you have to learn to step back, especially from the things that you're not the best at, and then focus on the things that the team really looks to you, to do well. And I'm starting to figure out how to do more and more of that. And that's been a journey over the last 6 months, reflecting both with my team members, in some cases even my family. My wife will definitely tell me those things. So point out those things often, that this is probably not an area you should be kind of leaning into. And I think that's probably something that I feel is helpful for many entrepreneurs. I've seen the mistake being made time and time again. And I actually, one of my coaches / mentors, he likes to talk about this idea that business is the ultimate sport. I think it's a widely spoken about phrase. I think it's from Mark Cuban. But if you think about business as a sport, you are an athlete. And as an athlete, you think about the greatest athletes in the world. What do you think that they're doing in the off season? They're focusing. So Serena Williams, when she's on the grind off season, no championship, she's focusing on her backhand, her forehand, or she's focusing on her serve, her strengths. And I think but she's not focusing on, I don't know, running faster. I mean, potentially she's obviously kind of trying to increase speed, but there's some things that every athlete will know. This is my thing. This is what I do well. I think if you try to take some of that approach into the way you're developing your career as an entrepreneur, I think it can be incredibly powerful versus just trying to plug the holes or plug the gaps all the time.
I like that. Ivan, what are you learning? What didn't you know 6 months ago, 12 months ago?
Oh, let me try and pick something relevant. I was just thinking about what did I not know when I started my entrepreneurial journey. Let me just get closer to present day rather than 8 years ago. I think, oh yeah, here we go. When COVID struck, right? So this is our business. Our business is unsecured loans, right? Delivered through a mobile platform to customers. These are customers that we've never ever seen, right? The customer literally lies behind data in a device, right? You underwrite them remotely. You determine how much you can lend to them remotely, and if you approve them and they request a loan, you disperse it into their mobile money wallet, and then they pay you back, right? And it's this incredible trust and unusual model as sort of traditional finances. Then COVID strikes, right? And it strikes the whole world. It's this perfect black swan that comes in, which everyone sees coming, but no one anticipates just how bad it could be, right? It's like you're crashing into a wall in slow motion. And suddenly the world goes in pause, right? So our customers who have taken our loans begin to either get delayed salaries, lose their jobs. Businesses that depend on literal footfall, people walking by. Well, there's no one walking by because you have lockdowns, right? You have restricted movement. And then, 6-12 months ago, I'll be honest with you, I didn't know if our business model would survive, right? It's because suddenly you realize that there's some things you just assumed was continue in perpetuity. We never thought to yourself, if there's restricted movement, would that mean that our customers can't pay us? If it's like these little risks that are so far out. They happen maybe once in a lifetime, right? And that was the test. But thankfully, we did survive. We actually did thrive. But I can tell you that it was a moment of truth, right? When you really, when you have to question every single thing and think about what must you do differently. So that in terms of what I learned, I think it made me a believer in many ways. It made me a believer of our core business, but it also made me a believer of the importance of doing certain things which are painful in the short term, but protect the business in the long term. I had to make a very difficult call, which was to stop lending to all my customers like this until I could figure out what was going on. And that is like terrible. You're pulling a lifeline, right? I'm really glad we did that because it allowed us to stop the bleeding. It allowed us to kind of cause this gush of blood. That's a terrible image. But then eventually it also allows us to focus on understand, okay, is every customer experiencing this? Which customers are probably thriving better? And at the end, we're actually able to start lending to our customers after a couple of months. And because we stopped, we're actually alive today to actually continue serving them. So that I think one of the biggest lessons really was just, I really learned a lot about what happens when everything falls apart unexpectedly. Yeah.
Awesome. Just a few questions. Naomi calls them quick fires, so I'll try and quick fire, right? The pandemic has been really interesting, and it's revealed a lot of things to entrepreneurs and to companies. Most of it is the people aspect, and Tinashe, you've touched on that a little bit. And my question is, how can entrepreneurs attract and retain the right people or the right talent? Quick fire.
Make sure that they're aligned with your mission up front. As for attracting them, I think you just have to tell an authentic story about what you're trying to do. If the mission is authentic, I think the right people will respond to it and just make sure that that mission is being spread far and wide, which is what we try to do.
Thank you. Ivan, you did so well with the quick fire, Tinashe. Ivan, how can entrepreneurs attract and keep the right talent?
I would say that the first sale you make, even before you sell to a customer, you sell to an investor, is to convince other people to join your business. Convince your team members to actually join you on board, right? So you have to focus on honing and translating and telling that story. As Tinashe said, actual fundraising, by the way, I'll tell you all about it. You'd be surprised. It is not about financial modeling. It's not about your network. It really is about your ability to tell a story. And that is first proven when it comes to the people you work with. If you cannot tell the story convincingly enough, get them to believe and actually see this thing which is just in your head. I keep on saying it, and it sounds like something that, yes, every entrepreneur does every day, but it's really magical. Can you imagine? You have this concept in your head, and then you convince others that not only can it become true, but they should leave where they're at and join you to build it. And you know what? Sometimes we call people like that madmen. And other times we call people like that visionaries. And it really all depends on just who's speaking, right? It's really that, if I think about getting the right people in the team, hone in on that story, make sure they see this thing you're trying to build, make sure they're as hungry, foolish, and obsessed as you are about making this come alive. That's anyway.
Yeah. So I've seen a really interesting question here from Emmanuel, and it's aligned to, maybe Ashley, you can help me pull it up. What do you do when the going gets hard? Or how do you, yes. Yeah, that's actually what he meant. What do you do when the going gets hard? How do you just manage it all emotionally, mentally? Feel free to give a personal example, not just a general answer. Ivan?
Sure.
Okay, I can go ahead. Gosh, another key lesson I learned for entrepreneurship is that the battle is won or lost in your head. You know, going back to that point about storytelling, convincing people to join your team, convincing entrepreneurs to back you. Optimism and pessimism are equally contagious. And unfortunately, it really starts with you. And so as an entrepreneur, you have a very unfair burden to be the source of optimism for your team. And if you sort of let that pessimism spread, it can be very hard to contain, right? So in terms of how do you actually do it, what do you do when the going gets tough? I'll give you an example. The most nightmarish thing that ever happened in all my years was this. The ink had barely dried on a new funding round. We raised $800,000 from some investors. And then in the same week, I discovered that one of our largest client partners had defrauded us of $500,000. Right, in that single moment. So it's like 800,000 comes in, you discover a $500,000 hole. And in that moment, I can't tell you the mix of shame, rage, regret. You go through, it really is as if something died inside of you. And I cycled through a lot of emotions, a lot. I'll be honest with you. It is like you want to give up, but you also feel guilty. I hired these people. They left their jobs. They depend on the salary to pay their kids' school fees. What about the customers that depend on us to give us service? How do I make this right with investors who just put money in my company and then discovered that this massive haul of fraud has happened, and I had to literally physically separate myself, right? So one thing I do when things get hard sometimes is I literally go into a hall, which would be like, well, it's my house, my farm, just lock the door. And, some people would be like, no, you immediately go out there and convince people, but you have to go out there when you're ready, when you have strengthened your mental defenses, because if those walls are weak, as I told you, optimism and pessimism are contagious, right? If you go out there and you're trying to do a speech which is disingenuous, something that you yourself do not yet believe in, you will not be able to sell that you can get out of this crisis. So I spent a couple of days away. I think I had to travel for a business trip, which is great. So I was actually able to disappear. And by the time I convinced myself and I'd cycled through all those emotions, I was able to come on and create a news story about why I thought we could still overcome this thing and still win.
Yeah. Cool. Tinashe, how do you balance it all? Quick fire. Ivan started we were doing quick fire.
From my side, it's you have to build your support tribe. I've been very careful about, and my support tribe includes specific family members, peers, and obviously mentors, advisors that have guided me. So I think the combination of that, when the going gets tough, the reality is no one's an island. We all need each other, to kind of move ahead and get through tough times. And that's exactly what happened during the pandemic. The first people I called was my support tribe. And you just need that, I wanted to say figurative shoulder to cry on, but I think in some cases it was literal during this pandemic. So I think that's critical, and everyone knows who their support tribe is.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm just going to take one last audience question, and I'll pose that to you, Tinashe. And Ashley, if you could pull this up, it's from Owen Daka, who's watching on YouTube. He says, Ivan or Tinashe, is it advisable to pitch a business idea or plan to a foreign investor, for instance, in the US, through the internet to convince them to invest in Africa? Tinashe?
That's a great question, actually. So the interesting point, but the investor that led our round, this last one, is an American investor that we've never met in person. We did that all on Zoom. but they have a deep appreciation for the opportunity on the African continent and in Latin America. So from my perspective, obviously there might be different perspectives out there, but from my perspective, absolutely. In fact, I feel that the capital that's out there is a bit more pioneering as far as what they see as the global opportunity. And so when we spoke about how we wanted to build a business that would do well in Africa, do well in Latin America, and maybe someday do well in Asia, they got it because they had seen that, time and time again with other businesses that they had backed. Except now they're looking further afield beyond the US. So I would definitely recommend. In fact, I would say the best feedback you can get is speak to as many people as possible to understand the appeal from different investor communities or circles.
Wow, thank you guys. I promise you there's so many questions, so I'm going to ask you guys, if possible, at the end of this session, at some point, if you can, please just go to your social media pages and just respond to all those amazing people who are raising such valid questions. But I just want to pose something to both of you, and I'll start with you, Ivan. What are you most grateful for at this moment?
I am so many things I'm most grateful for. When I think about my entrepreneurship journey, I'm so grateful that I had a chance. I had a chance to translate a vision into an actual tangible business. I'm so grateful for those team members who actually believed in this vision. I'm so grateful for my co-founder that he was actually the best person for me to start this business with. I'm really grateful for the investors. And I think about today, that sort of shifted. Now I have a family. I'm incredibly grateful for the partner that I have, my wife, the children, and really I do believe, as we sort of said earlier, there are no mistakes in life. Everything is bizarrely connected. So I'm tremendously grateful for the experiences that I have, which I believe have actually led me to where I am and where I will go, and which are hopefully even better places. Thank you. And yeah, so in terms of sharing details, how people can reach me, I'll share it with AMI. Shortly.
Awesome, thank you. Tinashe, what are you most grateful for at this point, at this moment?
At this point, I'm grateful for those around me, those closest to me. So definitely grateful for the support, for my wife, my family, my team. I think definitely could not have made it this far, without them. And most certainly grateful for the investors that continue to believe in us. All of this translates into us just being in the game, which is incredibly special to me to just be a part of this. I hope that it continues and we continue to grow from strength to strength.
Well, there you have it, Naomi.
Yeah. Thank you so much to our guests, and such insightful nuggets. It was just lovely to just get to hear them and even read some of the questions and comments from the audience. So join us next week, guys, on Thursday for our monthly Thrive Community Networking event. Then we will get to meet and interact in person. We'll be joined by a renowned entrepreneur, Aisha Pador, and details are on the screen, but also on the comment section. So if you have time next Thursday, do join us. And if you're part of the Thrive community, look out for our upcoming pulse check. Would like to know where you all are and how you're all doing, so that we can continue to support you. Yeah. So let me just read some shout outs for people who joined us later. Lloyd, I see George is asking, please, is there a way you can receive mentorship from you? Yes, George, please be in touch. We'll be putting our details on the screen. I'll be putting my email and WhatsApp number so we could talk. Ashley will help me do that. And we can connect you to the speakers who are there today, and you can also follow them on Instagram. Just write them a nice message. They will accept that message. So I see John from Uganda. Who else is here? Let's see. Owen, thank you so much. Thank you all for being such a great audience and indulging us. We've come to the very end. thanks again to our guest, and a very special thanks to you for joining us today. And until next month on Thursday, the 22nd of April, at the same time, at the same channel, we have been your hosts, Irene and Naomi, and have a good evening. Take care.